What's going on, guys? In today's video, we're going to go over my league start, which is going to be the same build that I was playing last league, which is the pure physical minions build. I'm going to go over the changes that 3.25 brought in, the buffs, the nerfs, all of that sort of thing, and just a couple things we need to change around because there's things that were added and removed as well. So without further ado, let's jump into it. All right, so if it's your first time here, we're not going to go super in depth on how the build works and how it's all set up. I did do that in a previous video, so I'll put a card up here in the corner of this video if you want to do a bit more of a deeper dive, right? So the purpose of this video is just to go into the changes that 3.25 brought and if the build is still viable. And yes, it is. It's very viable. It's still really, really good. We got a bit of a nerf to our damage, but we got a bit of a buff to our survivability. So it's kind of a wash in my opinion. I think that it's still very, very good. It's still very strong with a very low investment. So we're going to go into some of the changes that happened. All right, so as far as things go to the changes of the tree, there wasn't too much that changed for the low budget version of the build. There is a couple things that they did do, and there's a couple things that they didn't do that they said they were going to do. So one thing is they did change the minion offense mastery that it used to 20% chance to overwhelm physical damage or physical reduction. Now it just has a 50% chance to ignore physical damage reduction. According to POB, this is giving us about 1 million DPS. So I think it's better than the old setup. So I'm pretty sure that one is a buff. Also, the proposed nerfs that they had did not seem to go through. The tooltip reads the same as it did here on POB and also in the game. So I don't know if they just forgot to do those nerfs or they just decided not to do those nerfs. I'm not really sure, but those nerfs were, so we were supposed to have a nerf to mindless aggression. It was supposed to be 2% less minion damage and 10% less minion life. So it seems like that is the same as it was last league. So that didn't change. Also, what was the other one that changed? I think it was it Commander? Yeah, Commander of Darkness. That was supposed to drop down our elemental resistances by 10%. And I think it dropped our damage down as well. That didn't seem to change either. So both of those things are still in the game as they were last league. So they might end up going and reverting and changing that like they initially proposed in the patch notes, or maybe they just decided not to do it. I'm not really sure. But as it stands right now, it's exactly the same way it was as it was last league. So that's pretty good. As far as the skill tree goes, that's really it. There's not really any other changes that happened other than those, and I went over that in the last video. As far as the skill gems go, there are quite a few changes that happened that did affect our build, mostly because they were skills that were just straight up removed from the game, and there were other skills that were nerfed into the ground, right? So the biggest hit for us was probably the removal of Divine Blessing, which I was using to link with Val Haste and not have to worry too much about mana reservation efficiency, at least on a low budget version of the build, right? So unfortunately, Divine Blessing was removed from the game, which kind of threw a wrench in the gears on how to figure this out. So I was able to figure out the mana reservation efficiency, two ways that would keep it in the low budget realm. There is a much better solution in the higher budget version of the build, but I wanted to keep this affordable and usable for people that were just getting started or only had a very, very small budget to work with, right? So the first solution is you don't want to get rid of haste. We have to have haste in the build. Haste is just too good for our build. One solution is just turning off determination, right? Now, I know that sounds really bad, but what you would do is you would turn determination off, and then you would get the Guardian Turtle and just have determination from the Guardian Turtle. Now, it's not as good as a determination that would be on your character because you're not getting any aura effect, you're not getting any quality effect, but it's still pretty decent and allows you to have that buff still and continue to run haste because haste is really good. You do not want to drop haste. It's a huge DPS drop, right? So that's one solution. And with this solution as well, you would need to have mana. You either want to get it on your helmet, on your gloves, or yeah, helmet or gloves, and then you want to have mana on both of your Ghastly Eyes and your Darkness Enthroned, right? So it doesn't need to be max rolled. As long as you have mana in all three of those places, you should have enough mana reservation efficiency to run all of your auras, right? So that's one solution. The other solution is doing a Hungry Loop setup, but instead of going with your Animate Guardian, you're going to go with your Spectres, right? And the reason why you're doing that is because we are going to put the Animate Guardian on a Guardian Blessing setup. Okay, so same thing. You would go here, go to Hungry Loop, and then you would move your Spectres into the Hungry Loop with Feeding Frenzy, Maim, Meat Shield, and Minion Life, and then you would shift over your Animate Guardian into with Val Haste, Guardian's Blessing, and then Meat Shield. So this is I don't like this option as much because you probably won't have as good of gear for your Animate Guardian. It does give you a bit more DPS, but it's going to be harder to keep your Animate Guardian alive. So play around with it. If you see that your Animate Guardian is also, you can lock the level of this too, right? So you don't have to have this at super high level. You can keep this at level 1 or level 2, and then just to see how it goes as you're leveling this up. If you notice your Animate Guardian is taking way too much damage, then just either buy a lower version of it, or lock it at whatever level it is. That's still, you're still able to keep the AG alive, right? The final change in the skill gems comes in the way of Dread Banner. Now, they did change completely how banners work in general, but Dread Banner specifically, they changed the whole skill gem. It's not even close to the same skill gem anymore. It has the same name, doesn't do even close to the same thing, right? So the old Dread Banner used to give you Impale effect, and it used to also increase the effectiveness of Impale, which was really good for our build because we were getting Impale from the Carrion Golems, and we're also running Impale support, right? So now what it does is it gives a chance for you and your minions to block, and it gives you life back when you block, right? Not good at all for our build. I don't know if it's going to be good for any build really, but we're not going to be using it at all. We're going to swap it out for Flesh and Stone. Now, the cool thing about Flesh and Stone, if you've never used this skill gem, is it allows you to toggle between Blood and Sand stance. When you're in Sand stance, you take less damage. When you're in Blood stance, everyone takes 20% increased physical damage, right? We're a pure physical build, so it's just a buff for us, right? So it's really cool. So you can play around with it. You can say, oh, I'm taking a lot of damage. I'm getting kind of rocked in this map. Let me switch to Sand stance. Oh, like I need to get a bit more damage. You can switch to Blood stance, and you can switch back and forth, which is really cool. One of the negatives for this, though, is it did have more mana reservation efficiency than the old Dread Banner, so we had to kind of play around with the mana a little bit, but I fixed it. Just had to kind of move some things around. But yeah, that's it for the skill gem changes. As far as the item changes go, not too much really changed. The only thing was really just a buff, and Matas did get buffed. They did increase the base crit by about 2%, which is a really nice early game buff. It's going to give us a ton more damage early game. It is going to kind of fall off later game, though, because we basically get to crit cap anyways. So, really cool early game buff, doesn't really do too much for us in the mid to late game. But yeah, that's it for the item changes. It's basically exactly the same as it was last league. The good news is they did bring back all the Spectres, or most of the Spectres from the Affliction League. The bad news is they nerfed them into the ground. Most of them are just not even playable anymore, which is really unfortunate because it's kind of like, why bring them back if you're going to nerf them into the ground? Now, given there were some Spectres that were grossly overpowered, and I think they should have gotten some nerfs, but not like this. I mean, they're basically not going to be playable. Maybe they'll go back and buff them later, but as far as my build's concerned, there's only a couple options I think that we could maybe use in the build. So the first one is the Guardian Turtle. I talked about that previously in the video, but basically we can just use this as a stopgap to fix our mana reservation efficiency. Once we fix our mana, we probably won't use this anymore, but this is a good option just in the beginning to kind of still have a determination and not have to worry too much about mana reservation efficiency, right? So that's one option. Now, we did lose Warcaller because that was only exclusive to the last league because of the tattoos. we do have a substitution. It's not exactly the war caller, but it's pretty close, right? So that would be the perfect forest warrior. And what this does, this has calling strike, it's cyclones, does molten fissure. I'm not really sure what that is, but the ones that we care about are calling strike, and nearby allies have onslaught, right? Because that's what the war caller did. The war caller gave all of our allies onslaught, so we have a way to get onslaught through this guy. Okay, so that's probably the easiest one-to-one conversion. That's going to be the closest to the war caller. There are a couple other options that we can use potentially in that spot too. So the other option would be the perfect dancing sword. What it does is it gives nearby allies 20% chance to impale, and also increases the effect of impale. So basically taking the place of like a quasi dread banner from last league. It's not as good, but it is going to give us a bit more impale effect. So this could be an option. I need to test it to see if the damage increase is going to be good enough, but this is a potential option to fill that slot, or potentially add another Spectre to the build, right? So there's that one. And then the last one is the perfect pain artist. This one's more of a kind of like a maybe. We don't really care about spells because we're not casting spells. The 400% base crit on him himself is not really that relevant because we're not really buffing the Spectres. We're just using them as support Spectres. But the line of text we do care about is nearby allies have a 30% increased critical strike multiplier, right? So we are pretty close to crit capped on our minions. I mean, we're not exactly, but we're pretty darn close. So this would be a lot of increase in damage. I don't know how much though. I'd have to test it, but this is another potential option. And Zealotry we also don't really care about, so really it's more so just for the crit multi, which may or may not be worth it. Well, that's pretty much it for the build guide and for the update to 3.25. I will be releasing a higher budget version of the build next week. I have been working on that, and this is actually the high-end version that I ran last league. It's really good, and there's some spicy tech that I want to share with you guys. So, but yeah, that's it. If you guys enjoyed, please make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the little bell to let you know when I upload new content. I make weekly, sometimes bi-weekly content with a heavy emphasis on PoE, but I do lots of other stuff too. I do Baldur's Gate stuff. I do game reviews, game news, things like that. So until next time, guys, have a great day / night. See ya.